Regional project, W34, and you might remember that.
I was a member.
Then it went to W94 and some other numbers as time went on. But anyway, we were, as a committees, as a group of western states, there was all but I think two. I don't think Idaho, I know Washington wasn't in it. I don't think Idaho was. But anyway, we'd get together once a year and discuss our research and so on. And at that meeting, there would be just professors that did the work, that were doing the work, and some graduate students and so on. And I'm sure Larry was in on some of that. But anyway, then we come to the point where we felt like it would be important to have a conference like this and bring in speakers from way off yonder that were doing grazing studies, different than ours, of course. In some ways, maybe not, but more of them with you working with introduced grasses and so forth. And so we brought in speakers from Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Alberta, Canada, and we even had one paper from Israel and the USDA. And so these papers in here, good 2/3 probably of them are from places, well, maybe not half, are from research work done out of the western section. And so that was a little selfish motive on our part, but then our theme was 40 years of grazing livestock research. That was the theme of the meeting, so to speak. And we had, it went over well. We had 125 registered people, plus a lot of them had their wives. We had it tied into a vacation plan, so to speak. And at Buffalo, Wyoming. And the four of us, Raleigh and Wallace and Frank Hines and myself, we developed this meeting. But it was not a meeting to discuss and report research that was being done in the western section, because that work and research was being reported in the western section proceedings, and graduate students by and large were discussing it at the annual western section meeting. Some of the original work was done in New Mexico. Black and Knox and those guys, they were the first ones to come out with research that showed that maybe that phosphorus was a problem, and some of that work goes back as far as 1937, and that wouldn't have been Knox and Black. Their work was pretty much in the 40s, and then Harris and Cook and Stoddard came along in the late 40s, and they're the ones that really blowed this thing up to where it was an important item in our agricultural societies. And then, of course, but New Mexico and Utah were the primary states that really opened up the field of range nutrition. And then, in the first 40 years, and there was two major emphases. One was just practical supplementation work and using blood data and so on for indicators. And the other area was the development of techniques to study, and this, you got in on this, to study to determine the intake, the digestibility, and some of those things of grazing animals. And that's when the bags came in, and when the esophageal came in, and all kinds of indicators, external and internal, and of course Larry knows all of that stuff. My philosophy was you learn by mistakes, for one, and that's the way that you plan yourself. You don't have somebody plan it for you and you just go do it. You guys, both of you guys did a lot of planning. And I can remember Larry having a study set up, digestion and intake study using bags, and I forget the tracer or the indicator you're using. But anyway, in the wintertime, he went through the preliminary phases of it, got them ready and all that stuff. And the storm come in. And Larry comes into my house and says, "What do we do?" I said, "I don't know, Larry, it's your study. What do you want to do?"
Yeah.
I said, "If you want to put it off and do it later, we can do that. Or if you want to pull down your ear flaps and put on your coveralls, we can go after it." So he made the decision. I didn't, and he stayed with it. He said, "Well, I'll do it." But there was one thing came from that work that week. Was that it really pronounced the effect that the weather has on intake. My God, he cut that weather's little storm deal, just cut his intakes down half. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't even designed in the study. It wasn't a part of the study, but that's what we learned from that, and that's because he was a tough one, I'll tell you. He made the decision to do it in a blizzard or whatever it was. And that's just an example.
You know, I was talking to Jack about that a little bit. The one as I reflect back, I started reflecting on when you taught me something.
Yeah.
You know, you never did sit down and give me the facts of life about protein and energy and interactions and all that kind of stuff. So Dr. Clanton never did really teach me anything, but I have to say everything I know, you taught me. So, literally.
Well, I did.
That mentoring and that way of handling graduate students was obviously very effective, and for that time, very different, but obviously very effective.
I can remember with Jack, with his study, he had a real intense day planned. You remember all that blood samples and stuff. And when he was getting close to it, after the supplementation program, he was getting close to what it was the data he wanted to collect, and it was going to be a big day. And I told Jack, I says, "You tell me how many men or how many people you're going to need, and how many are going to be needed to bleed, how many are going to this, that, and the other thing." And I said, I'll get the manpower. And that's what we did. And he did a super job of doing that. And that was, the other way would be me doing it, and Jack, you'll go get the help. I agree that I knew that all the way along, that one of the first things that I made sure a graduate student knew before he got into research is the scientific method. You don't just go out and start doing something. You decide for sure what your problem is, and you do the research to make sure that you know what has been done and so forth. And you design your study, you collect your data, and you analyze statistically. That's the scientific method.
But you let us go ahead.
Yeah.
We designed them.
Yeah.
And if it worked, it worked. Thank goodness it worked.
We were talking, maybe you and I on the phone, about this kind of who trains who and the impact they have. And he mentioned Derek Bailey that trained with Larry, trained a young man that's now at Scotts Bluff, Mitch Stevenson. So, that pedigree of Lauren Harris to Don Clanton to Larry Rittenhouse to Derek Bailey to a young scientist that's getting started at a new location is, it's just cool to think at how that transfers in those, probably some of those same patterns you're talking about.
Yeah, that
carry
lineage.
through.
Yeah.
But I said earlier that, you know, a graduate student learned a lot by the mistakes they made. And those are the lessons you really remember.
Yep.
And I guess you didn't know, did you know Harden Peterson? But maybe not.
No.
He and Bob Lake were there at the same time. And poor Harvey, he thought one day I was probably going to send him down the road. He was working with cranberry meal as a protein supplement, and it turned out it was a good protein meal, but it was very unpalatable. So we were doctoring it up with molasses and whatever, you know, and we never did get it where it was really palatable enough to use. And so he did one individual feeding study there, and when he also was taking care of a bunch of cattle and steers, yearlings up in the pasture there, and when he got through with his experimental study, he's had some of this left over, and he thought, well, he was feeding them some supplement, I can just take that up there and feed it on the ground where there was pellets. So he did that, and the next day he went up, he had 3 or 4 dead steers. And he come in to tell me about it. He made Bob Lake come with him, so that there would be evidence of what was said. And he told him, you know, all about what happened. And of course, I knew right away what happened, but he didn't really figure that out. But we talked about it, and of course, there was a few steers that didn't mind the pelts, and they just ate them all, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, when we got done all of that, Bob and I got him settled down and so forth. I said, well, what did you learn, Harvey? And man, he went to great lengths what he learned. And I said, well, that's something you'll remember forever. And our meeting was over.
That when you mentioned that, you started a study about the kind of the variation in costs of grazing versus haying. When you set up a study at Gudmundsen that I think was designed and implemented early on in the days of Gudmundsen, that looked at meadow grazing and winter grazing versus haying. And when you mentioned the economics, it seems like Dick Clark was pretty instrumental in helping that.
Dick Clark was the best thing that ever happened for me, because up till his time, economists couldn't get interested in the production aspect of this, but Clark was very good. Yeah, he was one of the first ones to really work with us on some of our data, and I think you're right, the meadow management and timing of it and so on, to help us figure out how that worked into a system. Yeah.
So having
Dick was very good.
Economist as a partner, team member, whatever, was pretty vital.
Yeah, that's another thing that we did at the onset of, I'm going to say in 1970 or later. We decided, and I say we, I think probably Jim Nichols and I, we decided that we were dealing with a lot of variables and so on that we didn't understand. And that's when we brought into, and really it came about probably because of our irrigated pasture work, but we brought into the picture the an economist, an engineer, irrigation engineer, and it's really pioneered the team effect. In fact, we got when the university started putting out awards for whatever, we were the first group to get the team effect, the team approach board. And, because like at North Platte, we weren't, we were all assigned to a department in Lincoln, but we weren't assigned to any certain procedure at North Platte. And we could work together. And if it hadn't been for Bert, for example, Summerholler, our irrigated pasture work wouldn't have been as successful as it was. And so that, and yeah, Clark was the first economist that really took it on to get involved in our production programs. When I did get my PhD, I got it in June of '97, but I didn't leave Utah till January 1st of, I started at Nebraska. And I had work to do. I was writing papers, and Harris always had plenty of work to do. Lawrence says, you just hang in here if you can until what comes along is just what you want. And I don't know, I looked at jobs in industry and USDA. I looked at 2 USDA jobs. One was in Beltsville, one was in Miles City. And they offered them both to me, but I didn't want to go to Beltsville. I didn't even go back there. So we did that all on telephone. But anyway, then I went to the animal science meetings when they were still in Chicago, the annual. And on the bulletin board, I noticed a job at Nebraska. And I read that a little bit, and man, that sounded like something I could do, and I was interested. So I've had somebody find the department head who was there, introduce me, and we had a good visit. And that was about Thanksgiving time, you know, when they had those meetings there. So he says, he says, I'll go back and I'll talk to my directors and dean and so forth to see if this is, maybe you're the one we want to put in that position. So he did, and he said, I'll get back to you. And gosh, it wasn't 3 or 4 days after I got home, he called me and said, well, I think you better come on over and have a visit. So I did, and spent 2 days in Lincoln, and the last person I visited was Chancellor Harden, which surprised me. I didn't know I was going to get that far up the ladder. And he reviewed my application and my interests and whatever. And he says, I understand that you're like do rancher type work, and he called it. And I said, yeah, range livestock nutrition is my long suit. And he said, well, we should be doing some of that, but we don't have any place to do it. But he said, if you'd want to come and work toward that end, he said, we'd go with you and we'd get a chance. We'd get a ranch, we'll do it. And so I did. And then when the guy retired at North Platte that had the beef cattle, they all called and they said, would you like to go out there and take that on? I said, I'd love to. So we packed up, sold our house, and headed for North Platte. The interesting thing that a lot of people didn't know is that the Gudmundsen deal was in the wind for a long time before it happened, because of tax reasons and so on. So it was a deal where as soon as the foundation had 51%, then we took over the management, and that was in 1981. And so in that respect, then the next 9 years, that's what I did. I just spent my time. Yeah. Well, you were there then. Yeah. Some of that. And developing that, and that's when, by that time, we had the team approach going, and so Don Hudson, the veterinarian, worked into the program real well, and of course Nichols and I were the 2 gunners who on it, and Clark and that water what was his name? Hydrologist. He come into the program, and we looked at that ourselves and the hell are we gonna do with him? But you know, he did some of the most interesting work, digging wells, going down, way down. He'd go down there 200-300 feet in a well and start bringing up bark.
Yeah.
Was that Jim Gakey at that time? Or was that
Gakey.
before Gakey?
Yeah, Gakey, Jim Gakey. He was a good one. And we had a forester involved. And we did some forestry, tree plantings. We took off 20-some acres there, and I said, do whatever you want in there. You know, we planted these kind of other kind of trees and stuff. So that was one of the things that eventually came true for me, that I did get a chance to.
I was at Gudmundsen day before yesterday, and have you been back or since they've built the buildings, the big convention or conference center and so on?
The
Have
one that Wolf's built?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've been there since then.
that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I put them, when they got that built, then they didn't have, well, what are we gonna put in it? Didn't have any money to buy chairs, the lab work, or the lab facilities, dry lab deals, you know. So they do the normal thing, they go around and get money, and I put $1,000 into that part of it. And then they called it, the auditorium they called Bowie Auditorium, see? And Ray Bowie was down, their cattle manager down at Lincoln, and he didn't have a family, and so on. In his will, he left a pile of money to the animal science departments to do whatever they saw fit with, and so they did a lot of that. They indoors, inside work, you know, and they call it the Ray Bowie Auditorium in the Wolf Building. That's the politics of the university.
yeah.